Hello and welcome back to Geography 14, Cartographic Design. This is part 2 of the lecture on the history of cartography. I had already focused on ancient cartography, and I will now follow up on maps of the Renaissance from the 17th to the 19th century. Just a brief reminder that for week 1, we have 2 assignments in Module 0, the icebreaker discussion and the Module 0 quiz. We also have the assigned reading of Chapter 1 of Cynthia Brewer's our textbook. And we also have Review Lab 1 and Module 1 quiz for the module as well. So I want to continue with maps of the Renaissance now. I want to focus first on Appian's world map from 1530. This is a heart-shaped map that resulted from expanding Ptolemy's projection of the world. If you recall, Ptolemy's projection of the world included the first projection here with a graticule system, and this is expanded upon in Appian's world map. The heart-shaped world map was also very popular in the Renaissance, and we also see that knowledge of the old world here at the top. We see the Eastern Hemisphere fully mapped out, whereas the Western Hemisphere is still in large parts left blank. And so again, this is the Appian map is remarkable because if you expand Ptolemy's, this map creates a heart-shaped, if you expand Ptolemy's early projection for the known world during the Roman period. And this map, because of its shape, its novelty, became very popular during the Renaissance. We are going to begin to enter a period of more scientific cartography with the development of the Mercator world map by Gerardus Mercator. Gerardus Mercator was a mathematician, cartographer, geographer, as well as a merchant in Northern Europe. And he designed a projection of the world that took into consideration the most detailed mathematical formulas at the time as a way to try to flatten a three-dimensional sphere into a two-dimensional surface. So instead of having a map, a globe, which is quite bulky to carry around, it would be more useful for sailors and navigators to have a flat map that they could just unroll and look at. So what Gerardus Mercator is going to do, he's going to revolutionize cartography through several applications. First, he is going to take the content that we had already known from Claudius Ptolemy's work on geography. He's going to complement that with what is known from Marco Polo's travels of Asia, and he's also going to integrate Muhammad al-Idrisi's development of the Mediterranean world. He is also going to incorporate the latest knowledge about the new continents in the Western Hemisphere, and he is going to use a grid system along with a series of rhumb lines that are going to be able to direct navigators. So based on his new projection, if you follow a straight line with a compass, you will be able to get to the other part of the world where that line ends. However, as you might already know with the Mercator projection, the further you move away from the equator and closer to the North and the South Pole, the more distorted that the map becomes. And so these maps are really only useful for navigation south of 60 degrees north or north of 60 degrees south. Once you get into the poles, there's a lot of distortion. Another important map of the Renaissance was the Ortelius's world map, and it was the first modern atlas. It appeared, in the first modern atlas, the Theatrum Orbis Terrarum, which was the theater of the world. And this was a map that began to disseminate knowledge of the world at that point as was also described by territories. So what we can see in the Ortelius world map, we also see color-coded territories that are labeled as kingdoms, for example, or empires as well. The Honduras world map is the best example of a Renaissance map. It improves and reissues Mercator's atlas projection. It also continues to use several lines for navigation along with a gradical system, but it also incorporates figures like gerardus mercator, for example, and others here at the margins. And this map, the Honduras world map, is also trying to tell, in a way, a story of cartography, a story of the discovery of the New World and the relationship of Europe to these other continents. If you look at Europe, for example, it is also clearly delineated here, and many of the images that we see here are of Europeans ruling over indigenous people, for example. The Vancouver world map was also based on Mercator's projection, and it continues to use Portland lines, which are for navigation. Again, these are also known as rhumb lines for navigation. And this design of rhumb lines continues in other maps. For example, this is the John Biggenboon's map of California, which is actually a speculative map, which is based on a novel, a romance novel from the period, but it was believed that because of the Gulf of California, the island of California was actually an island inhabited by a queen, and so some of these maps were outlawed by the Spanish Empire because they thought that if other Europeans believed that there were large territories that were islands not claimed by Spain, then they could be claimed by other European powers. However, as early as 1540, so we're talking about a map from 1650, but by 1640, European explorers such as Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo had already established that California was not an island and that it was connected to the mainland, but that in fact there was a peninsula. And so some of these maps also become controversial and then they become banned. This is the last map of this section. This is the Great Trigonometrical Survey of 1801 to 1871. It took quite a long time to complete. The goal of the Trigonometrical Survey was basically to chart the subcontinent and the territories governed by the East India Company. And this is a survey map, basically a map that is trying to measure distances accurately as well as areas. It was completed by George Everest, especially the central spine, which goes from southern India all the way to the Himalayan mountain range. And this was one of the most scientifically the best designed maps for the period. So we're now talking about well into the 19th century, but we are now applying modern methods of land surveying to measure land areas, for example, and distances. And so this is also an important historic map in the development of cartography. But at this point, we are now entering modern surveying, and we are also entering the modern age. Okay, this is it for this second part on the history of cartography. Next, I will close this module with a short lecture on early thematic maps.